Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, that's quite loud. This is a better microphone than my last one. Welcome to our forum. We're very excited to have you here. We have a great list of online and in-person panelists. My name is Julie ESHLEMAN. I'm an assistive technology researcher at the University of Stirling and with Leonard Cheshire Disability, and I will be co-chairing this session with Tom, who can introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Julie. So I'm Thomas BIGNAL. I'm Head of Policy at EASPD, the European Association of Service Providers for Persons with Disabilities, and we bring together over 20,000 organizations across 41 European countries. And for us, we try and help the sector move closer to the principles of the UN Convention, and we also work on making sure the policies help us in doing that. So today we're going to be talking about personal care and caretaking. Quite a big word, care in many countries, many big debates going on in that regard. And maybe the starting point is very much that care needs to take a new route, needs to go in a new direction, away from the old traditional medical ways of providing care towards supporting people to live independently and in the community. And we have very clear guidance from the United Nations around how to do that in practice, and that's something that we will be discussing today. Care also needs to take another route because of the huge impact on gender equality in terms of how care is provided. In Europe at least, over 80% of care that's being provided, both professionally and unprofessionally, is done by women, and of course that impacts gender equality related issues too. So we need to talk about care also from a gender equality perspective and rebalance care responsibilities. The good news, because the context is not always positive, but the good news is that we know of new ways of providing support. We know and we hear every day of new models of providing support to people with disabilities in the community in a way which provides them with autonomy, choice, control, and social inclusion. And we would explore some of these ways today. Technology is also playing an increasingly important role in ensuring independent living, and we would also be discussing that today too. You can't provide care or professional care without having good funding, and therefore we will also be discussing which funding models enable support services to be done in a person-centered way, and in particular we would discuss personal budgets and the systems that exist around there. And last but not least, there is no care, there is no formal care, professional care without staff. And at least in Europe, and I think probably in many other areas too, we have huge staff shortages. It's difficult to recruit staff, it's difficult to retain staff. And therefore we also have to talk about that and try and find solutions to move forward. So clearly we need to provide services that enable independent living. We need to look at the gender equality areas too. We need to explore how to provide support for persons with disabilities in this way too. Technology will play a role, funding models have a role too, and then we will also discuss staff. So a lot to discuss, but we also have many great speakers. This session will be divided into 3 parts. Our first part will be 2 PowerPoint presentations to set a bit the context. Then we will go towards a panel discussion, and we will conclude with a question and answer with you if you have any questions afterwards. We hope that is okay for you. Great. So that's being said, now let's move to the presentations. We will start with Richard Duncan, who is, I think, online. He is Executive Director of the Ronald Mace Universal Design Institute in the US. Richard, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Hello, welcome, welcome. So please tell us your work on how technology can work in care, maybe even replacing it. You have 10 minutes, Richard.
Yes, indeed. A very short time. Greetings from Asheville, North Carolina, where I'm speaking to you from. And I, along with all others who are online, I'm sure we all wish that we could be joining you in person in lovely Vienna. So I'm going to speak very briefly, of course, about the intersection of 3 areas. Housing, which is an area we spend a lot of time in, aging, which is another area we spend a lot of time in, and technology. And I'm not the expert, I think, that a lot of people maybe in the room are about technology, but we are forced to engage it We will be engaging it more and more. So let's go to the first, click on the first, yeah, and I don't have a full view here. Let me see if I can do that. Okay, that's better. Click again. Okay, so we've got, technology going back a long, long way, right? And I go back so far that we get to the very early days of home technology, at least, and the benefits of ease of use and caregiving, ease of use and convenience that they wrought. So things like garage door openers, which we have everywhere now still, and remote controllers of various descriptions, which we still use, they were great. But even back then, we came to understand that, in fact, these were more than just functions of ease of use and convenience for a lot of folks. They mattered a lot more then. So click the next slide. So again, early days of this, we were involved in a couple of projects that used very basic computing back then and a tremendous amount of electrical engineering assistance with hugely expensive projects that allowed individuals with very serious disabling conditions to control many functions of their house, things we're familiar with now much more easily: opening and closing windows, drapes, operating lights, heating and ventilating, communicating. All these things were possible, but at terrific cost, and very rare and hard to get. Next slide. As I said, we've been working in this space for a long time. So click again. There we go. Once more. And in the 21st century, of course, we have this reality that's dominating a lot of our work, which is the aging of the United States and much of the rest of the world. More and more older adults, and fewer younger people to care for them. Not actually fewer. Next slide. These charts show United States demographics in 1960, United States in 2060. And you see the nice healthy ratio of young people to older folks in terms of numbers of us to take care of those who are older. And there's lots of younger people in 2060 as well. Just the ratio isn't quite so good, right? Far fewer of them to take care of us. And that's one of the dilemmas now. We have this caregiving crisis now, and certainly what will be coming up in the future. I apologize for some of the formatting issues. We had some transmittal things. So aging in place is something that we deal with a lot. So older folks aging into disability as opposed to aging with a disability. And of course, we're in great denial about all of that, which makes everything more difficult, even people like this. So next slide. We know what we want to have, which is us to be able to live as safely and as interdependently as we'd like. And guys like this are certainly doing all that they can, right? But even he needs additional assistance, not just from technology, but I'll argue always also from the housing side as well. And maybe that's the first stopping point, because that's places that we spend a lot of time in. So next slide. So older adults here, I'm sure is everywhere, live in all kinds of housing, almost none of it designed to accommodate us as we age. And lots of bad things happen to us as a result, including putting lots of pressure, and I would argue unnecessary and premature pressure, on any of the caregiving provision that might be required. Next slide. So we take a lot of time talking to folks about all the dangers of housing, and you may be familiar with a lot of these. So we have ground surfaces that may be inappropriate outside, requiring assistance, and if people use them independently, can result in people becoming injured and falling down. Next. Outside stairs that are designed badly and maintained poorly. Inside stairs, whoops, there you go. You can keep going. Inside stairs that may have no handrails. The handrails may be on one side or another, with unfortunate consequences. And I'm sorry for the drama for the next couple slides. Keep going. So bad things can happen, right? All kinds of injuries, and restricting our movements and requiring additional caregiving, which might not otherwise be needed if we were living in more appropriate housing. Tiny bathrooms, whether you use a wheelchair or you're ambulatory, constrain our activities, put us at risk of falls. Certainly if you use a wheelchair, these bathrooms, which are very typical, are a problem. And in kitchen also, falls risks being so dominant in the older adult population, all kinds of design issues which could be fixed, reducing the likelihood of this. There's one more click there. So we have some drama related to aging and bad home design. Keep going. There we go. So that's our goal, really, for older adults, right? We're aging into disability. We'd like to be able to maintain our situation as long as possible. And technology comes in, right? We have housing and the housing environments that do what I would think of as the heavy lifting of people's safety and independence, and a big difference maker in terms of the amount of caregiving that might be provided. You know, home tech and smart homes really add a whole element to that as well. And so we're looking to those areas in the context of contact with folks outside, with social connections, with safety, security, control of all these various kinds of home systems, and then health and healthcare, which has come up recently. And finally, the issue of, you know, as with our home environments, adding some home technology can help us remain in the places that we all say we want to stay for longer, rather than prematurely having to move to other settings of any kind, but certainly expensive care settings in some cases. I apologize for rushing for the interpreter. I'm sorry. Next. We have all these devices that we can control our environment with. Keep going. Our smartphones, tablets, watches, and now these things, right? I don't know how this is in other places, but certainly voice control devices are very dominant in a lot of our housing situations. All of these can enable us to control a whole range of our environments and the issues that we have. So we love our tablets and phones for the social connections that video conferencing and FaceTime bring to us. A wonderful thing. Keep going. And there is now growing this population of kind of comfort creatures that are mechanical and electrical, and I guess will become increasingly smart and be able to do interesting things, particularly for folks who are perhaps much older or in some kind of the dementia spectrum. Keep going. And then finally, we have the Internet of Things, which everything that's electrical can be controlled, you know, from bedside, from chairside, from any of our devices with voice control and so on. And you may be experiencing all this yourself. Great benefit to lots of older adults as well. Keep going. So we can have electronically controlled mix valves in our bathrooms and showers, where you can preset so you can avoid scalding and all kinds of other problems. Keep going. Smart kitchen and laundry appliances, which can start, stop, regulate temperature, do all kinds of things that we couldn't do before. Heating and ventilating control is very common now with Wi-Fi connections to these devices. Keep going. And lighting, probably the easiest area, because you can just take out old bulbs, right, and replace them with new modern LED bulbs that are brighter, as well as control them from your devices. Keep going. And of course, kind of everyone's first robot might be one of these things, these little robotic vacuum cleaners that can amuse our pets as well. And pet management is a whole other area of home technology. We love our pets. We're not always home. We're not always able to care for them as we might have once. And we can add voice control, video connection to them, video monitoring, all kinds of things to help us with that. And also in care management, as we get older and perhaps less able to take care of ourselves, there's a lot of software that's been borrowed from nursing care, at least in this country, that can help coordinate care from paid and unpaid caregivers. Next. You see that. Okay, go on. And then back up one. There we go. So in the health area, which is really coming on these days, there's a lot of areas that it could move into. It still is really at its infancy, I think, in terms of its spread and the ability for folks to be accessing it, but can deal with issues such as monitoring and alerting for falls, minding wandering, emergency call systems, health status monitors, activity sensors, and finally telemedicine.
Richard, you have 1 minute.
Yes, moving ahead. So in care management, same thing, right? Cameras, which brings up privacy issues. Go. Telemedicine, which got a big boost in COVID, but not so much these days. It's not very widespread. All the health status monitoring that's available now with wearable devices and much, much more. Go on. And I'm not sure how soon we are going to have, robot cooks or robot assistants, but certainly the caregiver demographics and social engagement will be dominant in moving this technology forward. Go ahead. And then we have artificial intelligence now. We're going to have robot doctors, maybe. We have a lot of this chatbot stuff happening now. Go ahead. And finally, just a quick recommendation, Frank and the Robot, an interesting movie, kind of humorous, but brings up a lot of these issues. There's lots of dark movies about robots. This is one that's slightly humorous and maybe gets us into kind of a mindset about what kind of artificial intelligence may be having to hold. Final comment, you know, we've got this caregiver crisis. The environment, you don't have to run that. I didn't mean to have that link in there. We have this caregiver crisis. The home environments, I think, is going to play a huge role, as well as technology, but as well as thinking about additional living environments that maybe deal with these issues of demographics also. Shared housing, cluster housing, informal kind of congregate care settings that you may all be experiencing in different contexts now. They may also have to play a role in kind of dealing with the demographic issues, caregiving, and of course, you need to have an environment that people can use fully for as long as possible. So thank you for your attention, and I'll pass it on to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Richard. Impressive the amount of technologies you went through in only 10 minutes, so thank you for raising that issue. Let's move on then quickly to our second speaker. I hope I pronounced this correctly, Jasna PUSKARIC, who works for WAG Austria, and they are an awardee in the Zero Project Awards this year. Congratulations, firstly. Can you tell us a bit about your initiative, Jasna? You have 10 minutes too.
Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you very much, and we're honored to have this award. About me, the speaker, everything I say you can read on my slides. If you don't see me, I'm a skinny woman with blonde long hair in an electric wheelchair. I have a high need of personal assistance. And I started participating in WAG in the inaugural meeting. For 1.5 years, I was member of the supervisory board. In November 2003, I started working there as a counselor. A few years later, I have built up the Department for Public Relations as an assistant to the management. And since 2017, I am elected board member and chairperson. Next slide, please. About the nonprofit cooperative. It was founded by people with disabilities. Only people with disabilities work on the executive board and in counseling. The principle of the independent living movement is mandatory. It says, nothing about us without us. Cooperative members are only people with disabilities. WAG shows that people with disabilities can run a company successfully, promote participation, and empower others. Next slide, please. The service. People with disabilities encourage people with disabilities to take charge of their lives with personal assistance. Personal assistance provides support at work and in everyday life, so participation works. People with disabilities live their social roles in society. People with disabilities decide for themselves how, where, when, and by whom they get personal assistance. The cooperative provides support with applying for funding, with organizing, with finding suitable personal assistances, and acts as their employer. Still, people with disabilities are in charge of every decision. Next slide, please. The particularities. First, the corporativeness. Cooperative members decide on the board and the goals in the General Assembly. Second, non-profit status. The aim is to enable as many people with disabilities as possible to live with personal assistance. The focus is not only on the financial gain, but on the common good. And third, representation of interests. WAC is committed to improve framework conditions. Political lobbying, campaigns, and media work are carried out. People with disabilities become more visible by the work of the cooperative and personal assistance. Next slide, please. The effects. People with disabilities are empowered to lead a self-determined life. Disabled counselors act as peer counselors and role models. Disabled customers do not have to act as entrepreneurs because personal assistances are employed by WAC. As a result, more people with disabilities can live with personal assistance because they pass on competences to the cooperative. Next slide, please. The philosophy. WAC is an invention by people with disabilities. They lead and direct the company. The majority of the internal employees lives with a disability. Customers with disabilities decide for themselves. And when purchasing additional services, the cooperative tries to prefigure offers from people with disabilities. Next slide, please. The facts. The cooperative was established in the year 2002 in Vienna with 3 women to work in the office and a few customers to be consulted. After 20 years, there are 40 employees in counseling, assistance coordination, and administration, half of whom live with a disability. There are 400 customers in consultation in Vienna, Lower Austria, and Burgenland. And there are 600 employees working at WAC as personal assistances. Next slide, please. More numbers to the growth. WAC has grown continuously up to the year 2019. The organized hours increased from 430,000 to 440,000 from the year 2018 to 2019. Due to COVID-19, there was a slump in the organized hours to 400,000 because many customers decided to reduce their organized hours to the minimum they needed. In 2022, the organized hours stabilized again to 415,000. Personal assistance has shown to be suitable for a pandemic because customers decide for themselves about the frequency of contacts. The last slide, please. About the future. We wish that as many people with disabilities as possible should have the opportunity to live with personal assistance. The aim of WAC is a needs-based and Austria-wide financing for personal assistance, which is uniformly designed. All Austrians with disabilities should be given the same opportunity to get personal assistance under the same conditions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jasna. A very clear example of how a care service, a support service can be organized to promote autonomy, choice, control, and to be in line with the principles of the UN Convention. I'm sure there are many questions, but we will come to that afterwards. Let's now go to the panel discussion. We have 5 or 6 speakers. Let's start with the United Nations. Let's start with Facundo CHAVEZ PENILLAS, who is Human Rights and Disability Advisor in the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Facundo, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. So the UN has been really, really active, especially over the last year, it seems, in particular, over how support services should be organized, how they should be transformed, and so forth. Can you tell us a bit more about the UN's approach to support services? What is the right approach and what is the wrong approach?
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Definitely, as you may know, the CRPD committee has developed a lot of standards related to support structures and systems, particularly looking at the issue of institutionalization as a matter of priority, particularly coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic results, right? So definitely the right approach from the human rights perspective is the support approach, and the support paradigm that it's looking at care systems and promoting transformation of care systems into support and care structures, right? I would have to say that the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated discussions on care in the UN system, and the impact of the pandemic made evident that existing care systems are no longer fit for purpose. Some of these challenges were already put forward: demographic changes, societal roles of women, aging societies, human rights obligations on women and persons with disabilities, older persons and children, are all reflecting that traditional care models as the ones that are still operating do not reflect the current societal demands, right? So traditional care ethics also that place persons with disabilities in a passive role are not only not reflecting human rights standards, but differ significantly from existing expectations. Similarly, the same care ethics place women in stereotypical roles of caregivers, right? Women rights organizations and the feminist movements evolved thinking on care systems, promoting a rights-based conceptual framework that recognizes the rights of caregivers and care receivers to a fair distribution of care between men and women, families, communities, and the state. This conceptual framework calls for recognition of care as work, be it paid or unpaid. In addition, it calls for reducing unpaid care work with the main objective of enabling women to better engage in economic activities. The conceptual framework also calls on 3 policy objectives: compensate care work through different strategies based on social protection, that's called cash for care, enable a fair time use to provide quality care, time for care, and substitute care through the provision of services. This conceptual framework and the accelerated discussion on care have the potential to create a common platform to deliver gender, disability, and age-responsive transformative care systems. While these are positive developments, disability rights remain broadly absent in these debates. States are mobilizing behind this framework through different approaches: feminist approaches, infrastructure plans, and social protection reforms are emerging in different countries. The paradigm shift from traditional care models to support, as proposed by the CRPD, needs to be properly reflected in care debates. Otherwise, we risk multiplying policies and practices that deny choice and control over the support that persons with disabilities receive, be it paid or unpaid. The UN Human Rights Council has recognized this gap in care debates and mandated our office, the UN Human Rights Office, to address the issue of support for community inclusion as a means to build back better from COVID-19 pandemic. In our latest report, UN Human Rights makes the case for ensuring that care debates make disability rights an integral part of the future of care, problematizing traditional care ethics, and intervening in the care agenda to make sure that choice and control over support is properly reflected. UN Human Rights is calling on states to ensure that transformative support and care systems are based on the CRPD. And during the month of February, the High Commissioner made a very clear call in that sense. In this sense, clear action is needed. Persons with disabilities must be part of current care economy debates. Care economy should not portray persons with disabilities as passive care recipients, but recognize them as both care providers and care recipients. The future of support and care systems must ensure choice and control over the support persons with disabilities receive. Care economy cannot be limited to human support only, but expand to social protection to pay for the extra costs related to support, the provision of assisted products, access to transportation and housing support, as we heard before. Support and care system must be in place to secure that a fair distribution of support enhances the enjoyment of human rights of persons with disabilities as well as women. The CRPD clearly adopts a support paradigm, and the CRPD committee has provided strong guidance through concluding observations, general comments, and lately in the deinstitutionalization guidelines. These standards need to be embedded in the future of support and care systems. The UN system has not yet reached to a clear understanding of disability rights in this context, and much more advocacy is needed to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Facundo. Again, covering a lot of ground in a short space of time. And I'm sure my co-chair, Judy, will have a question or two for you to go in a bit more depth. Let's go from, stay, I think, in the UN, but go to another body, which is the International Labour Organization. Stefan TROMEL, are you with us?
Hi, Thomas. Yes, I am.
Great.
Greetings from neighboring Switzerland.
Great. Nice. Thanks a lot for joining from the Swiss mountains, I hear. So the International Labour Organization, in its name, it's very much focused on labour-related issues. So why is care important for the ILO? And can you tell us a bit more about your position in this regard?
Yes, thank you, Thomas. I will, in fact, do that. I will try in 5 minutes to explain why the ILO is working on care generally, and then, of course, also look at the intersection with disability. Well, the interesting thing is that the care economy that was not an issue for the ILO, let's say 8-9 years ago, is now one of our top priorities. And it is so for a number of reasons: gender equality and the impact a bad distribution of care has on the participation of women in the labor market. Facundo has addressed it. Thomas, you addressed it yourself at the very beginning. It is, if it's well done, it is an employment niche. We are looking now at what are the employment opportunities in the future. We speak about the digital economy. We speak about the green economy. We also speak about the care economy as an employment opportunity for many people. If we move, and that's one of the ILO message, if we move more from informal care to formal care, wherever that is possible. To support that, we work in the ILO with what we call a budget simulator. So we try to help governments to understand what is the investment, and we should call it an investment, what is the investment required to move from informal care to formal care. We are, of course, also very concerned and interested in the working conditions of care workers. I was recently at a conference organized by Portuguese trade unions, where we were presented with the fact that care workers in Portugal, providing care to children, to older persons, to persons with disabilities, were all getting only, if at the best, the national minimum wage, which is pretty low also in Portugal. And even people that were working there for 20, 25 years in the same jobs had this minimum wage and had almost no education opportunities, no upskilling opportunities at all. Now, we all can agree that if the working conditions of care workers are not the adequate ones, it's very difficult to expect quality care. And when I use the term care, you can replace it with community support as much as you want. Now, what is the disability inclusion element? I fully agree with Facundo. We are at the beginning of getting persons with disabilities into that broader discussion. But I think we have an amazing opportunity because in general, and we see that coming from the very top of the UN, there is an increased attention to the care economy. It is still mostly framed from a gender equality perspective. We need to ensure that persons with disabilities are a key group in those discussions. That means to be sitting at the table, both as care provider, but of course also as care receiver. People with disabilities need to explain the type of community support they want. We've just seen this very excellent example from Austria. We need to have that voice of persons with disabilities and the voice of older persons who are also sort of evolving into a rethinking of the care system that for much too long has been designed in a very passive way, also for older persons. So I think, and again, as Facundo said, the COVID-19 pandemic has showed that the current care model or the predominant current care model is not fit for purpose and has led even to a huge number of people dying in institutions and all that. So we need to ensure that persons with disabilities are at the table, that they explain how they want that care and community support to be provided. We also need to remember, and again, the Austrian example is very good, how much investment in care for persons with disabilities can lead to persons with disabilities to the creation of employment, but also ensuring that people with disabilities in working age who require that type of support are then able to work, which otherwise, in the absence of such support, they would not be able to work or would only be confined perhaps to very basic telework. The final message I would like to give is we need to be also aware of the significant regional differences in the provision of generally, and we need to look at those differences and then intersect them with the rights of persons with disabilities. Not in every region the technological solution that we've heard will work at this stage. Perhaps also not some of the cooperative model might not work yet in all regions, also because of budget concerns. So we also need to think carefully about the mix of policies that would also fit with budgets, but also with cultural sensitivities that might also be different from one region to the other. Thomas, I'll leave it there. And thanks again for the invitation to participate.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you for introducing the perspective of the ILO in this area, which is, it's also important to get the labor-related issues in these discussions. Sometimes they're also ignored, which is part of the reason why we're struggling to have enough recruitment and retention of workers in the sector. Stefan mentioned the need to have a stronger voice of persons with disabilities in the care discussion. Well, let's do straight that. I will now ask you, Kamil, who you work for the European Network on Independent Living. It has been a bit discussed today, is that there's, in reality, a big gap between the UN's guidelines on deinstitutionalization and the current reality in terms of care services being provided in Europe, a big gap. How can we close that gap? Do you have a few suggestions for us, Kamil?
It's okay, thank you. Probably you can hear me now. So thank you, Thomas. Thank you, everyone, for coming here. My name is Kamil GOUNGOR. As Thomas said, I work for the European Network on Independent Living, ENIL in short. I will try to remind myself that I need to speak slower for the interpreters. Sorry for my quick speech, sorry. So for those who cannot see me, I am a wheelchair user, 34 years old, with not much hair. I'm getting older. I wear a top dark blue sweater, or whatever it's called in English. I'm sitting on an electric wheelchair user, and my body is like a final S. I mean, if that helps for you to imagine the shape. So I'm very happy to be here because I'm following the Zero project for years, and I've never been, and a lot of colleagues been here, and I'm fantastic to be among so many nice initiatives and so many people like you who do so many interesting things. To the question that you, Thomas, addressed, let me follow up with what you said in your introduction a little bit, and also Facundo also mentioned a bit. So we have a session called Personal Care and Caretaking, but at ENIL, at the organizational work, we are wondering why, we speak about care when we don't need care, but we need support. As you already was mentioned, I don't bring any new information here. It's, we heard about the old version of care or something like that, or Thomas said that the care needs to take a new route. I think that the new route for care is to go back and close in a room and don't go out again, because I don't think that we should talk. This is our approach. I'm happy to discuss that. We don't think that we should probably talk much about care, since the language is very important, and when you talk about care or about vulnerable people, then you probably send messages which are not what disabled people of 2023 would like to send for themselves. We don't really. So, in fact, what we see in our organization is that the return of the medical model of the charity, or of the charity model, as they are one of the main barriers to the implementation of the CRPD, the general comments, like the general comment number 5, for example, and the guidelines on the institutionalization. Allow me to say the institutionalization DI, because if I say the institutionalization, I'm already tired. So we will go with DI. Hopefully that's okay for everyone. And according to these models, the medical and the charity model, disabled people are portrayed as vulnerable, in need of care. But we are not. We are not vulnerable. The barriers and the oppression we face make us what we would call vulnerable. And at ENIL, we advocate for the right to support, such as personal assistance, like Jasna very nice said before, and it was a very good example. And we believe that we need care only where we are sick, where we are ill. So like in health care, so like everyone else, not only disabled people. Or where we are or we have children, and then you need child care. Yes, of course. Or when you care for your family, you need care. To care for the family, for your friends. But we don't need care because we are disabled people. At least this is our view, how we see the situation. Every other attempt to imply that disabled people are in need of care, and that we must be grateful to those who provide care, including institutions, big or small ones. And this is another big discussion, how we interpret institutionalization, but we are not here to discuss this at the moment. Undermines the rights we gained so hardly all these years with the CRPD, because there was a serious work done by many disabled people in our communities, and many of you here, to achieve what we achieved today. So, in Europe at least, we have seen the comeback of the approach, for example, of this approach in the European care strategy. Many of you probably heard about it. And the recommendations on long-term care. However, we also see it in the international level, so it's not only a European issue, of course. One of the objectives of the care strategy, the European care strategy, is to make sure that countries value care, to reduce the burden of informal care, to close the gender gap, to improve the attractiveness of the care sectors. All of these are very legitimate objectives. However, this should not be at the expense of the right of disabled people to choice and control over the support we receive. So for this reason, we are asking that the two agendas to be considered separately and have been asking for disabled people to be excluded from the care strategy, just like we have been excluded also from the consultations, which have been largely dominated by different providers and organizations which are not disabled people. Moreover, at least in Europe, there is no scarcity of resources. So the problem is that they are being used to enforce institutions rather to be directed towards personal assistance or to be paid to disabled people throughout personal budget and direct payments. So most of the gaps in relation to the implementation of the guidelines, which unfortunately many people have not read, and I think it's a fantastic document which we can, very well understand, what is correct, what is not correct, what it means, institutionalization, what not, similar to the general comments. So I encourage you all to read these documents. They might be a little bit long, but they are worth it. And they are very eye-opening. For me, they were as well. So we believe that most of these gaps in relation to the implementation of the guidelines come down to the lack of choice and control of disabled people, according to the guidelines. For example, we see that DI goes beyond buildings and the reorganization of services. So it must be focused on restoring autonomy, choice, and control of disabled people. And it must be led by disabled people. So we already had it also by speakers before me that disabled people should be in the front line and design and co-design together these things. So even though the independent living is on the agenda, we are seeing many new services labeled as independent living or DI, but they have nothing to do with the independent living. For example, group homes. I was in another session before. I was excited to follow the session, and there was a speaker saying about what they do with group homes, family-like homes, he called them, for 3 or 4 individuals. And I was thinking, this is not in line with the CRPD. This is not independent living. This person who was speaking about the homes would not live in such home. So why we talk about this here? So even in this fantastic environment like the Zero conference, we still have and discuss topics which are not in line with the CRPD, the DI guidelines, and all these documents. Even in our disability movement, in every country, we see that. So we need to work also with disabled people, with our organization, empower each other. This is very important. I know I'm aware of my time. I'm finishing. Just 10 seconds. Maybe a bit more than 10, but yeah. Yeah. So here we are. Okay. Some of these new services, like we said, which are small group homes, where disabled people live together in apartments or houses, despite having some level of choice of control, or sometimes, they have some elements which would not be considered institutional. There are other elements which are considered institutional, and grouping people together based on any characteristic, in that case, disability, for example, or any specific kind of impairment, in order to access services. For example, we heard also the example, not in this session again, but in another session, of people having to live in the same neighborhood in order to benefit from some services. These things are discriminatory and against the CRPD and the DI guidelines. So I will stop it here, just because of the time, but I'm very happy to continue the discussion, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kamil. Again, very clear, we need to change the language, we need to change the models, and we need to change how money is being used. Talking about money, I will then move on to Lieve DEKEMPENEER, who is director of Hubby, which is a service provider in the region of Brussels in Belgium. The public authorities in your area have put in place a personal budget system. How has it impacted your organization as a provider? Has it worked in terms of providing more choice and control for persons with disabilities?
Hello, everybody. I first maybe want to say that in Flanders, beside this personal budget system, we still have a lot of other subsidy systems that still are in place. But for adults with disabilities, this is the main budget system. So I just want to say that. We established the model, and that was the strong point in it, I think, in a very good cooperation with government users, service providers. We could formulate a shared dream. That's where we want to end, and it helped a lot to work together. We had a lot of discussions, a lot of brainstorming, but we reached our goal, which is a legislation that we could implement on personal budgets, and that we did. So that was already very good. Personal budget, what is it in Flanders? It is a tailor-made budget for a person with a disability based on an assessment. It takes quite a long time, this assessment, so it's a long procedure where you have to go through, which is not so good. And once the user has his budget, he can buy or care or support or both. Within his own network, he can do that. He can do that from an individual support worker, and then we go to the personal assistant system. He can do that. He also can buy services from service providers that he chooses himself. So he can choose wherever he wants to go with his budget. When he comes to my organization, he's there for some years, and then he says, I'm not so happy with the support I get. He can say, okay, I'm moving out, I'm taking my money with me and going to another service provider. That's how it works. Yeah, the impact for the services, for the service providers was, well, quite big. In a certain way, we really had to make also in the way we organize our services, we had to make a real transition to social entrepreneurship, which we didn't have to do before. We have less strict regulations and much more options, the way we shape our organization, the way, what kind of support we organize, how flexible we organize it. We can really choose there whatever we want. We negotiate with our service users about this is what we can offer. This is the price you have to pay, so we can negotiate on. We have to set a price on what we do. We never were used to do that. That was the most difficult thing for us, I think. We could develop new kind of services that we didn't have before because there was a great freedom of possibilities. And also what was very good was that we could work much more than we did before already with mainstream services that deliver all kinds of services to our users that we don't deliver, and we come in for the other parts. We see that a lot of new initiatives were established during the last 2-3 years, and that the options for users are much more extended. There's a much bigger variety in support options where they can choose between, which is very good. For as a service provider, when I look to our organization, we have to deal with more uncertainty of growth potential of the organization because users can come, users can go and take their budget. So it's of course very good because we have to be very careful about the quality we deliver, about the way we take in account what users really need and want as support. But we saw that to deal with this threats, to say so, we saw a lot of, I don't know the word in English, organizations merge together to become a little bit bigger. There is much more attention for branding of your organization because it's important. It's important that users know your organization and find a way to it. We hear the word already sometimes, the care. I really am happy with what Kamil said. I absolutely don't like the word care, but the care economy. There's a lot of things to say about that, I think. The strength of the model is, of course, the choice of freedom, the freedom of choice for the users. They get their support and they get the money to buy the support the way they want, and that's very good. And we have organizations, maybe you could say a little bit similar to the WAG, because they help people in how spend their budget. Because for some users it's not easy to do that on your own, so we have some assistance there, which is a very good thing, I think. The weakness is, I discussed it with Kamil just before this session. It's a bit strange, you know, it's a very good procedure and a very good legislation. And then there you have a support need, you have an assessment, and then the government says, here is your rucksack that you can have, and he's that big because that's the support you need, but he remains empty. So, and then you have to wait maybe 1 year, sometimes 5, 6 years, sometimes even longer, before there gets any money in your rucksack where you can buy your support with. So that's really a very, very weak point in the whole procedure, of course, because it's very nice on paper and in legislation, and it's working. But of course, if government does not follow with the funding, we have a problem. I think that's the most important thing to say about that, I think.
Thank you very much, Lieve. Bringing in, I think, a little bit of a similar perspective and a different perspective at the same time, which is very useful. And at EASPD, we're working a lot on personal budgets because we think it's not the only way forward, but one of the best way forwards in terms of making sure that services respond to the choices and the wishes of the people that they support. And so we have the UNIC project, which is a cross-European project looking into how to improve existing personal budget systems around Europe. So the UNIC is UNIC. If you go on UNIC project online, you will find lots of good resources there to really move forward with personal budgets and to be a little bit less conservative or traditional in how we are approaching the funding of services. If we don't change the funding of services, then we're not going to change how services are being provided. Thank you, Lieve. Now we go to our last speaker in this panel discussion, Sue SWENSON. Are you with us?
I'm here.
Thank you for your patience in this discussion. So you have many hats, I hear, but you're also president of Inclusion International. And you have been working quite a bit around the role of family support and so forth. Can you tell us a bit about your activities and your research and work in this area?
Yep. So I've been working on it since 1982 when my son Charlie was born with very complex and multiple disabilities. In 1989, I had the tremendous benefit of being trained by Ed Roberts in what independent living meant and how it could be applied. We worked together on how it could be applied to persons with intellectual disabilities. I just want to be the first person to bring the word love into this conversation. I was with Ed for the whole day on his birthday in 1995, which was the year that he died. I was with him, it was maybe a couple months before he died. We spent some time at his home, which he shared with his mother. And because I had been fairly well schooled in independent living, and because I was a smartass, I asked him, why do you live with your mother? And he said, because we love each other. I think we need to keep considering the role of love in care and caregiving and not try to replace it with some neoliberal, individualistic fantasy that if you give people money, they will get what they need in their life. Because people need love at least as much as they need money. So that being said, let me just point out a couple of key points to you. First, the CRPD committee made a really key decision in October of last year about the rights of families to support. The It was Bellini versus Italy. If you go to the CRPD's homepage, you will see a link to the decision in the upper right corner of the page. They found that Italy's failure to provide individualized support services to a family of persons with disabilities was discriminatory and violated the family's rights. They violated their rights to a family life, to live independently, and to an adequate standard of living. The case is really a breakthrough because the committee recognized the violation of a family caregiver's right to social support in addition to the rights of persons with disabilities. This is also the first case that the committee has examined claims of discrimination by association. Speaking as a mother, my son Charlie lived to age 30. Very clearly part of what is involved with family caregiving. And so many individual budgets in the United States are centered around trying to fund family caregiving. The discrimination by association continues. The committee was very mindful of the purpose of the convention to protect persons with disabilities, and so they took a cautious approach while at the same time recognizing the human rights of the family. The committee stated that it was aware of instances in which the rights of persons with disabilities cannot be realized without the protection of family caregivers. I want to put that here because when everything is individualized and all of our outcome measures are individualized and all of our budgeting is focused only on the person, we forget the family often at our own peril. And the committee concluded that in the narrow context of Article 28, 2C, the convention recognizes the right of family caregivers to state protection, and it provided that this recognition is indivisibly linked to the protection of the rights of family members with disabilities. I think Ed and his whole architecture of independent living movement in the United States would completely recognize this as a key. Ed visited my home. He knew Charlie. He knew what we were doing. Charlie had the first personal budget for a child in Minnesota in 1993. So, by the way, I had to fight with independent living on that because they kept saying that, no, you could only have personal care if the person was able to direct the care themselves, and Charlie was an 11-year-old child at the time. So that was a bit of a struggle, but our movement cannot afford to drive a wedge between families, wives, sisters, as well as parents. So something I want to just put in here that what we have to do is support love. There is a U.S. National Caregiver Strategy from the Administration on Community Living. I think maybe Alison Barkoff is at the Zero Conference. I'm not positive. If she is, you can ask her about it. She's the person who rolled it out. The caregiving strategy says we must be strength-based, culturally informed, whole person focused. We have to cultivate connections inside the system and out. We have to prioritize rights, choice, and control. It's really key. Something that parents and families need an opportunity to learn. We aren't born often with an understanding of how we can support our sons and daughters to grow in their independence within our families. We need opportunities to learn it. The strategy also says we should drive partnership, teamwork, communication, and facilitation, and be mindful of trauma. That is, I think, the sudden realization that the system is working against you is very difficult for families, and most describe it as traumatic. Now, Inclusion International worked with Down Syndrome International over the last couple of years. We did 1,600 consultations with people with intellectual disabilities around the world in every region, because we note that accommodating and listening to persons with other disabilities is often more easily accomplished. and people with intellectual disabilities are sometimes left to the tender mercies of their families. But we wanted to create guidelines for support of the decision-making processes that accommodate persons with intellectual disabilities. So whether it's a person-centered planning team or a board of directors or an advocacy group or any organization where people are in a meeting and some of the members have intellectual disabilities, our guidelines will help you with communication, information, good support, how to structure meetings, how to structure consultations, how to include people in projects, on project teams, how to include people in advocacy and campaigns, how to employ people with disabilities, with intellectual disabilities, how to build inclusive organizations. So when you say nothing about us without us, let's remember that the us has to be inclusive, right? And leadership, how to really listen to people who have intellectual disabilities in leadership roles. You can find these guidelines at listenincluderespect.com. So that's just all one word. I just also wanted to put out there, I wrote an article in 2014 with the great Charlie Lakin, the leader of community-based living and deinstitutionalization in the United States. The article is called A Wicked Problem, Can Governments Be Fair to Families Living with Disabilities? It's behind a paywall at JSTOR. If you have access, great. If you don't, if you want to see it, send me an email at sue.swenson@gmail.com or sue.swenson@inclusion-international.org, and I can send you a PDF. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. I will make sure that, for sure, at ESPD we will be looking into those guidelines because they are very important for the work that a lot of our members do. So thank you very much for sharing that. I will now pass the floor to my co-chair, Judy, for the Q&A.
Thanks, everyone, for these discussions. I feel like we're talking a lot about interdependencies, right? How there are a lot of ways that we are all relying on each other in terms of policy, in terms of family, in terms of communities, in terms of professionals and service providers, and people who ourselves are disabled and are drawing on support services. So I feel like we keep kind of dancing around this idea that some of these interdependencies are really beneficial and are working well, and some of them are working a little bit less well. So I wanted to kind of open the floor just a little bit to discuss how some of these things are interacting and how I think policy plays an important role. We keep kind of talking about if only we had the funding more quickly. If only it was easier to spend it, manage it, access it, use it. If only there were more people who were accepting that funding, coordinating supports in this way would be a lot easier. So I kind of wanted to open up the floor if there's anybody, if any of the panelists online want to start to talk a little bit about what are the opportunities in policy to make a more slippery slope for the work that you are doing? And perhaps, Sue, it would be reasonable to start with you.
I'd be happy to. So one of the problems, and I have managed those kinds of budgets for my son, one of the problems is there aren't markets. So you have the money, but there's no place to buy the things that you need, whether it's transportation or other kinds of social supports. So that's just a key piece to think about, I think. And I see Facundo's hand is up, so I'm going to get out of the way.
Welcome in, Facundo. Are you there?
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you, colleagues. I think we need to make a few notes on this, right? The first one, when we are talking about care, we completely agree. The language has a long history and a terrible weight on persons with disabilities. But I wouldn't say only on persons with disabilities. It also has it on women's rights, on older persons' rights, on children's rights. I think that we need to think of of the transformation of care systems in a way that it's very much aligned with the rights of all these people, right? The second point that I would like to make is on the system approach, right? Because when we're talking about care economy, or we're talking about support systems or support and care systems, what we are looking at is as systems that provide for the demands that are coming from in a specific context, right? And I will take points that were raised by Camille and also by Sue in this conversation, right? Definitely, there are systems that have more individualistic approaches. This is a reality, and it has to be with the cosmovision of a given country, right? If you live in a country where that logic is the strongest logic, let's say, most likely the system will be designed on that line. In a country where you have much more community-based structures as a prevalence of that approach in terms of providing support, systems will be more defined on a line of community-based structures, right? And I come from Latin America and I live in Europe, and I can tell you that the difference is very big, right? In Latin America, we have much stronger community-based structures for many reasons, including from ideological and cultural reasons. And here in Europe, the logics are different, right? And at the same time, the rights of those that are providing care and that are receiving care should be equally considered, right? In this sense. And when we say equally, it doesn't mean that one rights are over the others, or that there will be a systematic violation of others, as Camille was saying before. It shouldn't be at the cost of the rights of persons with disabilities that we advance on these processes, right? So I think what is most important at this point is to think of the systems that we want. What are the policies that will enable the systems to operate under the demands that people with disabilities, caregivers, workers, etc., need to have a fair distribution of support and care in a given structure that is reducing the impact on gender inequalities, that is reducing the impact on the rights of persons with disabilities, and that it's enabling the kind of world that we want to live in, right? That should be our objective in this. And then you have different devices, right? You will have a stronger, as Sue was saying in the case of the Italian case managed by the CRP committee, you may have support to family members, because without that support, they cannot provide quality care, and that quality care is affecting the rights of persons with disabilities. You can have also independent living services as personal assistance services. You can have peer support services. You can have crisis management services. You can have a bunch of different tools to address the rights, not only of also persons with intellectual disabilities or like us, people with mobility impairments, but also to address the many realities of blind people, of people that are deaf, and so on. So that would be my call in this. And I think it's a very important starting point, and I'm very happy to have the chance to discuss with colleagues, because we need to be making strategic decisions in terms of where we're going to be putting our efforts, right? We can definitely continue moving policies and structures that are addressing, for example, personal assistance services and so on. That should continue. And we can also think of integrating the same logics into the larger conversation of the care economy, right? Because that will mobilize billions of dollars in the coming years. And I think when we are talking about money, this should be also a consideration, a strategic consideration to have in mind.
Thank you for that. And I think you're right. I feel like what I hear you saying is that the systems are built from what the money funds, right, and where the money comes from. And so if we want different kinds of systems, or we want systems for disabled people to draw on support in the way they want to, then the funding has to drive that, right? It creates the economies that are going to provide the supports that people want. Richard and Richard, do you want to come in on that, or Stefan, are you still there? I don't know if hands are up online. I want to make sure everybody gets to speak if they'd like.
Julie, if that's Stefan, I can very quickly come in to build a bit on the last point that Facundo raised, because Kamil raised a very important issue, which is a fundamental discussion. No? Are we going to propose that the discussion around support to persons with disabilities is excluded from the general care discussion? Now, I think when the CRPD was negotiated, the whole discussion around deinstitutionalization, personal support, independent living was a disability-specific discussion. And it has been a disability-specific discussion. And it has these complex elements that Sue has addressed. No? How do you make an independent living approach work for persons with intellectual disability, the role of families? I mean, these are, let's say, the disability internal discussions, complex as they are, important as they are. For me, it's very important, and while I fully understand that the negative weight of the concept of care with this very passive approach, I think, as Facundo said, and that is what I've been trying to promote in the ILO, is persons with disabilities and the support they require need to be part of the bigger care discussions. Because once you're part of the discussion, you see that many of the issues that we are discussing internally are similar discussions happening in the general discussions. It's about working conditions, it's about choice, it's about changing the paradigm, etc., etc. No? So while I fully take the point, Kamil, that you raised, that persons with disabilities were not part or adequate part of the discussion of the European care strategy, I also read the document. I know it's not good enough from a disability perspective. The question and the fundamental question that the disability movement needs to decide now is, do we want to go on our own as a separate discussion, or do we want to join the bigger discussion, knowing that we are somehow a slight latecomer? I don't think it's too late. We are making some progress, but it's a fundamental discussion, because we can't do both at the same time. We need to focus our energies, and at least from my perspective, and Facundo has really been spearheading that work, from my perspective, we need to be part of the mainstream care economy, community support discussions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We have about 5 minutes left, so I want to start to kind of close down just a little bit, but I wanted to give everybody, each of our panelists, another opportunity to kind of give a closing piece. So one of the last things I'd like to hear in about 30 seconds or so from each is what is the change or progress in your space that you're really excited and hopeful about, that you think that the world should really be paying attention to? What do you think that you have built that people need to steal? And can I start maybe with you, Lieve?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I would talk about something else and not what they would. I think this personal budget thing is a very good system, a good tool to do a lot of good things. I would say two things. Care economy, for me, it's also a kind of dangerous, because it will reduce care very, very quickly to a product that you can buy and that can be purchased. I am very frightened of that. So it should really stay, most of it, not for profit, and it should not become very quickly for profit. That's one thing. I really agree that disability should be involved in the whole discussion just because of that. And then I would say, whatever systems we do, my organization is situated in Brussels. I have amongst my users 26 nationalities, all kind of languages, all kind of cultural backgrounds, and we give support to people with a support need from 1 hour a week maybe, or 1 hour a month, where we just pop in, to people that need severe support 24 hours a day. It could be a physical impairment, but it also could be a severe intellectual disability with more psychiatrical problems on top. There is not one solution, and you will not find one system that fits for both. It's not possible. So what we have to do is building a system that allows or families or service providers What can I do, what do I need to do to support this one individual that's for me? And that could be very different for all kind of people. That's what I would like to say.
Yep, thank you very much. Camille, do you have a closing? What idea do you have that the world should steal? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the interesting discussion. I know it's not that easy to, to decide whether something is exactly white or black. We have the gray area also, so there is a lot of things, and I understand that what I discussed earlier and what I said about was kind of, if not controversial, maybe it was also triggering for further discussion and debate, and I want to let you know all that I'm happy to talk with you afterwards, since we have limited time to go deeper and to see this discussion about care and about how disabled people can be supported to live in the community with choice and control. I mean, after all, the General Conference is about this, about to support each other, to be inspired by each other, and to make change together. My final message, my final sentence for now, because I know that we don't have time and I don't want to steal it from the other ones, is just whatever we say here, whatever we present you here, it's possible. It's not in our mind, so believe it. Let's talk together and let's find out together how we can do it. I know many people, also from my perspective, from the country I live, that, Okay, yeah, I don't believe, we are bad people or there's bad intentions. So to answer also to what Stefan said, no, I don't think we should go by ourselves. We should go all together. The thing is that there is some lack of knowledge sometimes and some lack of expertise. So that's why I'm very happy that things like the Zero Conference is present and that we are part of it to discuss together and empower each other. So thank you. And I'm available for that.
Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt. I know that we are entirely out of time because we've had such rich discussion. I hope that we continue all of these discussions online. I know that there are Twitter hashtags that are going around and lots of online spaces where people are sharing ideas like this. So thank you all very much for coming. Thank you to all of our panelists. This was a fantastic discussion. We really appreciate all of your input. We can all